What can you tell me about what causes earthquakes and how the magnitude of an earthquake is measured?
Okay. The earthquakes occur down in the earth, usually pretty deep, maybe 10, 20 miles deep. And it's when two tectonic plates either horizontally fracture or they vertically fracture or combinations of that. And the heavier the movement, the stronger the earthquake waves that radiate out from that. And it can go from 1 to 10, and each order of magnitude from like 1 to 2 is 10 times higher than the last. Like 3 is 10 times higher than 2, and all the way up. So it's kind of a logarithmic level of intensity on the scale of earthquakes. But I've gone through quite a few earthquakes. The last one that we went through in Idaho occurred up near Stanley, and that was a 6.5 magnitude. But by the time it got down here, it was closer to maybe a 4 or 4.5. But I have gone through earthquakes back in California that were around 8 to 8.5, like the Loma Prieta earthquake is one of them that was real heavy. And then there was a Sylmar earthquake that was especially heavy that woke us up during the night. And the shaking was so violent that a lot of the cupboards, doors would open up and different bottles and glassware would fly off into the floor and break up, and the doors were banging together, and it was really noisy, and it would just scare you to death, these big earthquakes.
I can only imagine, because the 4 that we experienced here in near Boise, I noticed it and I could hear things rattling, and our table rattled. So I can only imagine what an 8 or higher would be like.
Yeah, when you go from like a 4 up to an 8, you're talking about like 100,000 or 1,000,000 times more intensity in the waves that travel.
That's awesome. And then what do you know about the waves that come after the initial
the aftershocks?
wave? Yes.
Yeah, the aftershocks are after, let's say, 2 plates move suddenly and it causes these earthquake waves to radiate out. Then later on, there's other areas that get stressed out because of this initial movement. And either the original one can move a little bit, but more often it's other areas. It might be a mile or 2 away or 10 miles away. And because of this initial movement, it puts extra stress on these, what they call aftershocks. And they are usually lower intensity, not always, but almost always lower, usually a 1 or 2 magnitudes lower level of intensity that radiate out. And these kind of keep occurring through days or weeks or even months. And as time goes along, the stresses that it puts on other areas gets less and less. And so your earthquake magnitudes drop off to near 3 or lower, in which you can't really feel those anymore. Science can measure them, like between 1 and 2 and the 3s, but it's very difficult for us to feel them unless you're really still, like on a chair, and you're real sensitive to any movements.
And they measure those using a seismograph, right?
Mm-hmm. It's a little needle that moves back and forth that when the earth moves around, if this needle moves with it, it draws.
It reminds me of a lie detector,
kind of,
where it moves back and forth, but it's just based on the movement.
But the way they've got it hooked up is these small movements in the earth create a bigger movement in the needle. And so the bigger the deflection of the needle, the larger the magnitude of the earthquake.
And what is the center area where an earthquake happens? What is that called? The epicenter?
The epicenter.
Can't know everything. I can't remember everything, right?
No, it's
you knew that.
I know it, but when you get older, you go, what? That's why we're not on the talk shows.
Thank you.